record.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so my name is Zara. I am an occupational therapist by trade, and I also am very heavily trained in mental health. And today we're going to talk about somatic healing techniques. In terms of questions, I'm not going to be monitoring the Q&A box, but at the end, I'm going to take a look at it. So feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A box, and I will get to them at the end of the lecture. I did see a question in there about how long is it? It might be about an hour long, but like Dr. Rick said, it's going to be recorded, so you can watch it later in more manageable chunks if you have to leave at any point. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. And start PowerPoint. All right. So yeah, we're going to talk about somatic healing techniques. So a little bit about me. Like I said, I'm an occupational therapist. I did my undergrad in psychology and neuroscience. And that picture on the left is me after a very significant horseback riding accident when I was younger. I was 13 and fell off a horse, and I really significantly damaged my pelvis. I was in chronic pain for 10 years. So when I give this education, I'm not only giving it from my clinical and research perspective, but I'm also giving it from a personal one, having lived with chronic pain for a long time and having the trauma of that and also other pretty serious accidents in my life. It's both personal, very personal to me, and also I studied it for a long time, and I treat clients. So yeah, I'm very, very passionate about this stuff, and it means a lot to me to be here today and talking to you about this, because this stuff has radically changed my life and the life of a lot of my clients. So I think it's really important. So when we talk about somatic therapy, you may have heard this term before, but just to break it down a little bit, soma just means body. And like Dr. Arsenault referenced in the beginning, there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's so true. The body really is a storage house of everything that's ever happened to us. And so if we've experienced trauma or we've experienced, anything that's kind of overwhelmed our nervous system's ability to cope, it's going to be stored in the body in different ways. And that means that it might show up as things like fatigue or pain or other like nervousness, sort of like a body-based nervousness. There's a lot of things that can kind of be stored in our body on a cellular level. And somatic therapy works from the bottom up, which is also something that Dr. Arsenault was saying in the intro there, is that there's a difference between working from the top down and the bottom up, which we're going to get to in the next slide. But the primary goal of somatic experiencing or somatic therapy is to modify the trauma-related stress response through bottom-up processing. So instead of just talking about our thoughts and experiences or trying to challenge our thoughts, which is useful, and cognitive behavior therapy, which challenges thoughts, is very, very useful and has been studied for many, many years to be useful. Somatic therapies are approaching it from a bit of a different way, where we're focusing on our physical bodies and our physical sensations, and we're using that as a way to sort of change our physiology and the physiology of our brain and the physiology of our body. So just to explain that a little bit more, because I know it might be a little confusing if you're not used to these kinds of terms. But a top-down approach in psychotherapy starts with looking at how the mind is interpreting information. So when we're talking about top-down, we're talking about like basically working with the brain and working with our cognitions first. So this is about changing your thoughts. This is about maybe talking with a counselor and understanding why, you're processing things in a certain way, or maybe you're having specific thoughts and you're challenging those thoughts. Again, this is useful. But this is sort of the higher brain where logic lives. And the logic first approach is less effective with chronic things like long COVID or chronic fatigue or chronic pain, because the main part of all of those disorders is that we have this limbic system activation, which is our emotional brain. And our emotional brain does not like to talk to our logical brain. They're not good friends. And so I can't, that's the reason why none of us can sit here and say, I want to feel good today. And then that just magically happens, right? Our emotional brain doesn't speak English, so to speak. So we can talk to it all we want, but it's not going to actually be able to hear properly. So the bottom-up approach helps us to figure out ways to modify our body's responses and to kind of use like biohacks, which a few of them we'll get into today. And we're going to get into many more in 2 weeks from now when we go over nervous system regulation. But this is basically working with our actual physical sensations in the body. So that's what that means. And it's by doing that, we're actually speaking the language of the nervous system. And that's really important. So like I was saying, in ADHD, in people who have trauma, people with PTSD, people with chronic fatigue, chronic pain, and long COVID can be added to this list as well. We see this very similar activity that happens in the brain on brain scans. So what we see with all of these conditions is that there's more neuroplasticity. So there's more connections in the brain to a part of the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is part of the limbic system. So it's part of the emotional brain. And it's the fear center is what it's called. I lovingly refer to it as the screaming almond of terror because it's this tiny little almond shaped part of the mind. And it's always screaming at us that something's wrong and we're going to die. So you can call it the screaming almond of terror too, if you want. Kind of takes the sting out of it and it's less sciencey than the amygdala. But yeah, the screaming almond of terror gets all of these connections to it in the brain, in all of these conditions. And the frontal cortex, which is responsible for things like how we process information and how we're thinking and planning and organizing, it kind of shuts down, and not completely. Obviously, we're still going about our lives, but that part is basically quieter. And the amygdala, the screaming almond of terror, the fear center, is running the show. It's saying it's got the reins on our brain. And so there's this underlying sort of like predisposition towards fear and towards a dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system. So when our autonomic nervous system is dysregulated, that comes with a whole host of symptoms because our autonomic nervous system controls everything automatic in our body. So if you think like your blood pressure, if you're digesting food or not, if you're sweating or not, like I am right now talking to hundreds of people, your autonomic nervous system controls automatic functions. So if it's dysregulated, you can have all kinds of weird symptoms that are otherwise like kind of unexplainable by doctors, right? So like dizziness and extreme fatigue and, maybe heart changes. So like a fluttering of the heart, or your heart goes really fast all of a sudden, or you maybe get really dizzy when you stand up, or maybe you're not digesting food well and you have a lot of stomach issues, or you're interpreting pain signals differently and you have a lot of pain. There's a lot of different ways in which it can become dysregulated when we have more connections to the amygdala. So again, we can't just like challenge our thoughts and then change the connections to the amygdala. It doesn't work that way. So in order to change the brain, because the brain is plastic, it's changeable, it is totally possible to rewire your brain so that the frontal cortex has more space and the amygdala has less connections to it. In order to do that, we have to work on the level of the brain and the level of the body. So what we're going to do today is go through a bunch of different strategies that can help you work on the level of the brain. So feel free to take screenshots if you want, or write notes or whatever you need to help. This is also being recorded, so you can listen to it again at another time. But that's what we're going to go through today. So there's this really big difference between thinking our feelings and feeling our feelings. And this is one of the first exercises that I wanted to go over, because I can tell you that like 90% of my clients have a very hard time with this. What happens in session with a lot of my clients is that people will come to me and they're really intellectualizing everything that they're going through. They're having a lot of thoughts about it. They're really like trying to make sense of everything and kind of really going into the intellect and the thinking part of their brain. And they're, instead of actually feeling their feelings, they're thinking them. So one of the first things that I like to do with my clients is kind of distinguish between the two and help people learn to feel their feelings. Because if we feel our feelings, they actually don't last as long. Feelings are not permanent. Basically, an emotion usually only lasts for 30 seconds, maybe a minute. But the thing that makes emotions turn into moods and emotions last much longer is when we feed them or we suppress them. So if we're really pushing our emotions down, like, no, I really don't want to feel that, and we're like just, distracting ourselves with thoughts, that is going to make those emotions last longer because they don't have a chance to be processed. And the same thing that if we're feeding them, like if we're saying, oh, I'm not worthy, this is going to last forever, I'm unlovable, I'm a burden on my family, we're like feeding that emotion a bunch of thoughts, it's also going to make it last longer. But if we treat our emotions sort of like guests that show up at our house, and we might not exactly love them as guests, but we welcome them in and we let them hang out for a while, and then they'll kind of leave on their own. But again, if you're sort of like feeding them all of these thoughts that you have, or you're like slamming the door in their face, they're not going to go away. So this is sort of a step-by-step how to feel your feelings versus think them. And you may be like, well, what do my feelings have to do with my physical symptoms, right? I'm tired all the time, or I'm dizzy all the time. What do my feelings have to do with that? Feelings are directly related to the amygdala, so the limbic system. And if we can manage our feelings better on a physiological level, we can manage our symptoms as well. Because like I said, the amygdala is responsible for pumping out things like cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and norepinephrine, which, makes us feel really anxious if there's a lot of it. And controlling our autonomic responses. So on a very physical level, if we start to work with our feelings on a different way, then we can manage our physical symptoms as well. So that's why it's important. So number one, an unpleasant thought arises. So let's say you have the thought like, I'm a burden. What happens is that your mind is going to start to launch into a bunch of thoughts that are associated with that first thought or with the feeling that you're experiencing. So things like, oh, I'm unworthy, this is going to last forever, I'm unlovable. What you're doing here is thinking your feelings. So you're starting to feed that thought. You're going into your spiral. But what you want to do instead, number 3, is bring attention to the sensations in your body rather than the thoughts in your mind. So your mind is going to want to launch into a story. Your mind is going to be, well, this happened when I was a kid and I'm such an idiot and I can't do anything right. Your mind is really going to want to launch into a story. But what you want to do instead is bring your attention to a feeling in your body. So, okay, I'm noticing right now that my throat feels tight. And then just kind of sit with that sensation and breathe into it. Notice that that sensation isn't going to actually hurt you. It's just a physical manifestation of a feeling, and that's totally fine. So you just breathe into the sensation, you allow it to be there, see what it wants. It might, if your throat's feeling really tight, you might want to sing or hum or talk or move around or kind of move that emotion, or maybe you want to cry, yell into a pillow. So there might be something physical that you can do to sort of release the valve a little bit on that. But kind of just breathing into the sensation and feeling it. Again, your mind is going to want to launch right back into thoughts because we're so used to just thinking about our feelings that we have all these stories built up around them. When this happens, again, redirecting to our body, the somatic therapy that I was talking about, our body sensations, and allowing that feeling just to be there, trusting that it's temporary. Because when you actually start to do this and focus on the feeling in your body, you'll notice that it starts to change and it starts to shift. And that's going to change over time as you watch it. So this is an interesting exercise. It's a powerful exercise in thinking versus feeling our feelings. So that's something you can try when you have a big feeling that arises. So if you feel really anxious or, really sad or really angry, give this a try and see if you can notice what's happening in your body rather than following that train of thought in your head. Another thing that's really important is to just start noticing how your body reacts in certain situations. Sometimes there can be an incongruence between what's going on in our body and what we're actually saying out loud or what's happening in our brain. So for example, you could be talking about something that's is really happy to you, but your body's really tense. Or you're talking about something that's sad or sensitive, but you're laughing. Maybe you're hunching forward in certain scenarios, or you're protecting your body when you're talking about certain things, or, maybe someone's saying something really interesting and you're leaning in. So noticing your body and what's happening can tell you a lot about how you actually feel about something. Because if you are talking about something happy, but your body's tense, there might be some information in there that something that you're talking about is slightly uncomfortable for your body or doesn't feel safe for your body. And noticing, if there's certain scenarios, like maybe you're around certain people and you kind of close off your body posture, and you sort of cave in your chest and you make yourself small. That's a good cue to you that person might be someone that you don't feel as safe around, or it's a scenario that you don't feel as safe in. Something that happens a lot when we have a lot of pain or a lot of, physical symptoms of fatigue or whatever the physical symptom is that we start to lose interoception. So interoception is our ability to feel what's happening in our bodies. And when we're in pain all the time, we kind of numb it out. We like shove it down. And in doing that, we kind of numb out all of our body sensations. So we're not as connected to things like thirst and hunger and these little cues that our body gives us all the time, like body posture. Even right now, if you are like really interested in what I'm saying, you might be leaning in and be like, oh, interesting. And if you're feeling like some of this information is like subconsciously threatening, you might be guarding yourself in some way. Your muscles might be getting tenser. You might be, again, caving in your chest or holding yourself in a way that you didn't even consciously realize you were doing. So this is a really good way to start to get connected with the body as well, is just noticing these subtle ways in which your posture changes in certain situations or how your body reacts to certain situations, because our body has a lot to tell us all the time. And if we can start to get our body and our mind more congruent, then that can really help us to just know our bodies better. And that helps us to know our minds better. And then also we can use the posture to sort of change what's happening too. So if we're in a situation where we want to feel brave and we want to feel confident, or we want to feel more energized, we can literally shift our posture. So opening up the chest and, like sitting up nice and tall, and just by a little shift in your posture or by adjusting so that you have a smile on your face, that is a cue to the body that you're safe, and a cue to the amygdala, that screaming almond of terror, that there's no threats in your environment. And that can help you to actually shift your mood. It's called the facial feedback or the body feedback hypothesis. When we smile really big, it can help us to change our mood because our body is registering that as we're happy. And so it starts to produce chemicals like we're happy. So there's a couple different ways we can use this to our advantage. And again, I just want to encourage you that if you're feeling tired or this is a lot of information, to take a little break. I know that a lot of you are dealing with some chronic conditions that might require a break. So totally feel free to take one anytime. And actually, maybe I'll just cue for one right now. So maybe why don't we all just take 3 deep breaths together? So you can close your eyes and we're all just going to take 3 deep breaths in the name of really good pacing. With your deep breaths, make sure you're taking nice long exhales. The long exhale is going to help increase your parasympathetic activation, which is going to help soothe your nervous system. Great. Awesome. We'll continue. So starting to develop interoception and body awareness. So this is what we were just talking about in the last slide, but we're just taking it a couple steps further. So thinking to yourself and maybe even journaling about this later, how does your body usually express stress? what physical manifestations of stress are common for you? And it can be really interesting to start to connect some of the chronic symptoms to when you're feeling more stressed, because like I said, it's not about it being psychosomatic. So I'm not, I want to make it very clear that I'm not saying that your symptoms of a chronic disorder are in your head or completely under your control. That is 100% not what I'm saying. It's really important that you know that. But it is also important to recognize that our physical sensations are connected to this dysregulation of the nervous system and to the amygdala having more connections to it, right? So when we can connect our stress to our sensations, then it gives us a little bit more leverage and a little bit more of a sense of control, because we can actually, if we can manage our stress, we can manage our symptoms a little bit, not completely. I'm not saying it's going to completely go away by managing stress, but it is one way that we can work with it. So noting, and again, you might want to journal about this, what physical manifestations of stress are common for you. And that way you can sort of, when you recognize you're having that physical manifestation of stress, not just a feeling of anxiety, but, oh, my heart's going really fast, or, oh, my stomach hurts all of a sudden, or I'm sweating, then you can notice it faster. And then you can do things like some of the practices that I'm talking about a little bit sooner before it gets away from you. So journaling your physical sensations is another way of starting to develop that interoception, so that body awareness. Oftentimes when we are feeling chronic symptoms, we lose sight of the positive symptoms that are happening in our body. So you might want to go through your body piece by piece and just journal. Okay, in my head, I'm feeling like right now I can feel heat in my cheeks, and I can feel the feeling of my hair against my forehead. And I can feel that my lips are a bit dry. So you can go through, your head, and then list your physical sensations in your head, list the physical sensations in your neck and shoulders, in your arms, in your hands, etc. And include areas of numbness. If you're like, my pinky finger feels a little numb. I don't really feel any sensations in my pinky. That's fine. If you don't feel a sensation, just say, this area, I don't feel a sensation. And this is an exercise in, again, just getting to know our bodies and paying attention to more than just the negative symptoms, but also paying attention to things that are neutral or positive. And we're going to talk a little bit more about a concept called pendulation, which is a big concept in somatic experiencing, but we'll get into that as an actual exercise in a few minutes. You can also draw your sensations if you feel like you're more creative. You can put colors to them. You can think about them in in any sort of creative way that you want. Or if you're a musician, maybe you make music about the sensations that you're feeling. The whole idea is just to develop the awareness of our body again, because like I said, if you've had a lot of trauma, or if you've been in a chronic disease state for a long time, it's likely that you're not experiencing the full ability to feel what's going on in your body, and this will help you to regain that. Cause sensations and notice change. So put some pressure into a muscle in your arm, not a lot that you're going to hurt yourself, and just notice what it feels like before and after you add the pressure. Same with light touch or heat or cold. And what happens physically when you do this? This can be a really good mindfulness activity to promote and develop mindfulness. It's a really good way to build up that sensation of your actual physical body. Progressive muscle relaxation. So this is where you tense and release different parts of the body. So you can find progressive muscle relaxations available like on YouTube or probably Spotify or wherever you stream. And basically you would just like squeeze and release all the muscles in your face, and then squeeze and release your shoulders, squeeze and release your arms. And again, you're just being really mindful about what it feels like, the difference between the squeeze and release, or the difference between the sensation and the not sensation. And you're developing that bodily awareness through these exercises. So now we're going to jump into some more specific techniques. We will kind of go through them one by one. So the RAIN for self-compassion can be really good when you're either experiencing a very intense physical sensation, or you are very intense emotional sensation. So RAIN is an acronym. The R stands for recognize what's going on. And this is literally just being like, okay, I'm triggered right now, or I'm feeling really anxious right now, or I'm in a lot of pain right now. So you're just kind of stating out loud or writing down or thinking in your head, this is what's happening. The second step is to allow it to be there just as it is. And this is hard to do when you're experiencing something that's overwhelming. And this is a practice. But what we often want to do is recognize what's going on and then either suppress it. So like really try to ignore it, or try to do something to change it immediately, right? But if we give ourselves a little bit of space, so we recognize what's going on, and then we just, hey, I'm just going to allow this to be here just as it is. It's okay that I'm anxious right now. That is a part of life. It is human to be anxious. I'm just going to allow it. I'm just going to notice it. Like we said earlier, you might even notice the physical sensations and just kind of allow those physical sensations to be there. So for example, if you're feeling really anxious, oh, I'm really anxious. I have like a knot in my stomach. I'm just going to like notice that knot in my stomach for a little bit. And I'm going to see if it changes at all. Maybe when I breathe in, it changes. Maybe when I breathe out, it changes. Maybe in the next 3 minutes, it's going to, evolve or move or change. I'm just going to kind of allow it to be there. And then the next one is investigating with interest and care. So often when we have a very big physical thing that's happening, something in our body wants our attention, right? Something in our body is saying, hey, can you pay attention to me, please? I need something, right? So whether it's a big emotion or it's a big physical sensation, usually there's a need underlying that. So if we can kind of investigate and say, okay, what wants my attention here? How am I experiencing this in my body? What am I believing about myself? Am I berating myself? Am I telling myself I shouldn't feel this way? And what does this place want from me? What do I need? What do I need to hear? So you're kind of just like being your own personal investigator, saying, okay, in the most loving way possible, what can I do for my body right now? Like, what do I really need? And then listening, just, your body will tell you what you need. And sometimes it's literally just like, okay, you really need to pace yourself. You really need to slow down. You really need an ice pack. You might need a chocolate bar. I don't know. You might get anything, right? So it's just listening. What is it that I need? And then nurturing, giving your body and mind what it needs, statements of reassurance. You could even just pet yourself lightly and be like, hey, it's okay. I'm here. I got you. Give yourself a hug, like, maybe you need to hear something like it's not your fault, or think about if you had a friend who was experiencing exactly what you were experiencing in that moment, how you might, like a really good friend, or maybe a child or something, how you might comfort them and what you would give them and what they need. And then do the same for yourself, or maybe ask for it from someone else if you need to as well. So I love this. There's also, this is from Tara Brach, who is a really beautiful writer on self-compassion. And you can also find YouTube clips that walk you through this step by step. If you just look up RAIN meditation on YouTube, it'll walk you through step by step exactly how to do this. Another grounding exercise, I bet a huge portion of you have heard of this one already, but I love it. And being grounded and mindful and tuned into our senses is really great. It's called the 5-4-3-2-1 grounding technique. So when you find yourself very anxious, or if you find yourself like, again, with a big physical sensation, you kind of notice other things happening. So 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, physically touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. What I have found for a lot of my clients is that they don't remember, was it 4 things I can feel, or was it 5 things? Was it 3 things? They get a bit confused if they have to do this by memory. And so do I, honestly. So I don't really even do it like 5-4-3-2-1. For me, when I do this technique, or when I do it with my clients, we just go, what do you hear right now? And you list as many things as you can hear. and what do you see? And you just list as many as you want to list. So you don't have to do it in this exact way. It doesn't have to be this prescribed, but just going through your senses and tuning into your senses can be really beneficial as a grounding exercise. This brings us also to resourcing. So this is a somatic therapy approach where we're using our imagination, but we're also thinking about how our imagination affects what's going on in our body. So what I want to do with you right now is a little thought experiment, a little exercise. So if you feel like it, we're going to just go along with this little thought experiment. So you can close your eyes, or you can look down at the ground if closing your eyes doesn't feel comfortable for you. And I want you to just try and imagine as good as you can. And if it's difficult for you to picture things in your head, that's okay. Just listen along to what I'm saying and pretend that you can imagine it, and the same purpose is served. But just close your eyes or look down at the ground and imagine yourself walking into your kitchen. So imagine what your kitchen looks like, or think about what your kitchen looks like. Just start to think about your kitchen as I'm talking. And then imagine yourself going over to the fridge and opening it up. And you can feel that little bit of cool air as you open the fridge up. And then you pull out a lemon. And as you pull out the lemon, you can kind of feel the waxy texture of the lemon on your skin. And you can see the bright yellow color. You can feel the weight of it in your hand. And bringing the lemon over to a cutting board, and then taking a knife and cutting the lemon in half. And as you do, you can smell the lemon more. There's this waft of lemon scent. And then taking half of that lemon in your hand and just taking a big bite out of it. Just imagine taking the biggest bite of that lemon. Okay, so you can open your eyes. So for most of you, what I'm assuming happened, if you were able to visualize that and kind of follow along with me, is that your lips might have puckered, you might have started to produce saliva, you might have had a physical reaction to an imaginary thing, right? This is because our bodies don't really know the difference between what we're seeing right in front of us and what we're imagining, or what we're like very vividly thinking about. And because of that lack of differentiation, we have physical responses when we think about things. So I can think about a test I have next week and start to get anxious and start to, act as if I'm right there doing the test, even though it's a week away, right? Our brains have this really powerful tool with thinking about things and being able to produce physical reactions just by thinking about something. So we can use this to our advantage by when we're feeling really stressed or we're feeling really overwhelmed with physical or emotional sensations, thinking of a person, an animal, a plant, a place, a personal strength, a memory, or an object that brings up positive sensations in your body. So thinking about, with one of my clients, we do a trip to Hawaii and thinking about how nice it was to be on the beach. And you think about all the wonderful sensations about being on the beach and the sun on your face and the waves and the sound of the waves and the breeze. And that might make you feel more safe in your body, right? It might help your symptoms to come down a little bit. And same thing with you could use a religious symbol if you want. So if you're religious, you can think about God, or you can think about, maybe a very comforting friend, or a spiritual thing. It really doesn't matter, as long as you're visualizing something, a presence of something that helps you to feel better in your body, helps you to feel safer in your body. And then you just tune into what emotions and sensations are associated with this and where you feel them in your body. So for example, when I think about cuddling a dog, I think about this warm, fuzzy sensation in my chest and, a lightness in my chest and a lightness in my body. And you can tune into those feelings and just try to amplify them and notice them in your body, because they might be there at the same time as your unpleasant feeling, but now you have this other competing thing that's also feeling good. So that is a tool you can use. And then pendulation is something I talked about a little bit before that I said I would talk about a little bit more, so the idea here is that we're not ignoring our emotions or our sensations. A lot of times when I go over education with clients, they'll be like, so you want me to just like be toxically positive and pretend everything's okay and just focus on all this other stuff? Not at all. Like I said, if we repress our emotions, we pretend they're not there, they're just going to get louder. That's part of what happens with any chronic condition, is that if we repress it over time, it'll get louder and louder and louder until we have to listen to it, right? So by no means at any time do I want you to ignore your sensations, but pendulation is a very good way to think about it. We want to notice the unpleasant sensation. So let's say I have a really horrible headache. So, and this is true, I do get really bad headaches after one of the accidents that I was in. Thankfully, they've decreased a lot, but I was having them every day for a while. So let's say I have a horrible headache. My head is pounding. It's really, really uncomfortable. What I'm going to do is notice that I have a really bad headache. And then I'm also going to notice somewhere else in my body or another sensation outside of my body that I can feel with my five senses that is neutral or pleasant. So for example, I'm noticing my head and how much it hurts. And then I'm noticing what the chair feels like beneath me. Or I'm noticing my head and then I'm noticing that my nose feels pretty neutral, or my ears feel neutral, or my big toe feels neutral, or, you know, the blanket that I have on me is very comforting, or it's a very nice temperature in this room, or that flower out the window is very pretty. Or, you know, the smell of my coffee is really nice. So what your pendulation is, basically you're swinging. So you're noticing the unpleasant sensation, and then you're noticing what other sensations you have. You're noticing the pleasant, unpleasant sensation, and then you're noticing what other sensations you have. You may have heard the term that neurons that fire together wire together. So if we are constantly noticing unpleasant sensation over and over and over again, it's laying down a pathway in our brain that will make it more likely for us to notice that unpleasant sensation, right? So it's kind of like if you walk the same path in a forest every single day. In the beginning, you're bushwhacking, right? In the beginning, you're like making the path. But after you've walked it 30 days in a row, that path is easy to walk on. It's the same thing with your brain. If every single day for 30 days you've been focused on your pain, it's going to be easier to focus on because your brain is giving you more power to focus on that part of your body. So what we can do is start to walk another path every once in a while. It doesn't, again, we're not ignoring the pain path, or we're not ignoring the symptoms path or the anxiety path or whatever it is. We're still walking down it every once in a while, checking it out, but we're also creating a whole other path so that eventually it gets a little harder to walk down the pain path or the unpleasant sensation path, let's say, sensation or emotion. So hopefully that makes sense. Basically, it's just an activity of attention, and we're bringing attention to other things that feel neutral or pleasant. Another thing that we can do is called sensory modulation. So this is our ability to regulate ourselves with our senses. So we'll get into this a little bit more in 2 weeks and talk about how we're regulating our nervous system and what all that means. But for now, we're just kind of scratch the surface with what sensory modulation is from a very bird's eye kind of view. So the idea is that we are either energizing or calming our nervous system by using our senses. So, you know, there's one thing where we can kind of just pay attention to whatever's happening in the moment. But another thing is that we can make something happen, right? So I could go to my fridge and get a lemon and smell it, and that might give me a bit of energy. Or I could chew some gum, and that might be energizing. Or watching a brightly patterned movie, or turning on an energizing song, or, you know, cold water. These kinds of things will energize my nervous system. So we could use that when we're feeling a little bit lower or a little bit like fatigued. And then if we're feeling hyper aroused, so we're feeling like, you know, anxious and kind of all over the place, then we can actually use sensations to calm our nervous system. So like maybe smelling lavender, or tasting chamomile, or looking at a cool color, hearing nature sounds, a weighted blanket, moving or rocking slowly. These things will soothe the system. Again, this is working on the body level, speaking the language of the body, basically telling it that it's safe and that it's basically helping it push it in the direction that we want it to go. So then we come to nervous system regulation. So again, with this, I'm just going to briefly touch on it. And then in 2 weeks, we're going to dive into it a lot more. But some techniques that you can use. So you can change your breath if you are like, again, this is all for when you're feeling unpleasant sensations, physical or emotional. So you can change your breath. So yawning is a way that you can start to shift your nervous system, and also belly breathing. So making sure that you're breathing way deep into your belly, taking nice inhales and long exhales. You don't want your inhale to be longer than your exhale, because your inhale stimulates your nervous system. So it makes you basically more alert, more anxious. Our exhale stimulates our parasympathetic nervous system, which makes us much calmer. So if you're seeking calm, then make sure your exhale is longer than your inhale. If you want to rev yourself up, then you can take a couple quick inhales, and that will also, give you that result. Again, with these nervous system regulation techniques, I'm going to go much deeper into them in 2 weeks, but right now, just scratching the surface. The physiological sigh is 2 quick inhales and a long exhale. And this is going to cue the nervous system to calm down. So it sounds like, and you can try that with me if you want. So basically, we're doubly inflating the little sacs in our lungs. We're offloading more CO2, and we're cueing the nervous system that we're safe. And as we'll learn in a couple of weeks, everything is all about safety and feeling safe in the body. That's going to start to shut down a lot of those autonomic responses that we were talking about that can cause a lot of your symptoms. The physiological sigh is really excellent. There was a 2023 study. It just came out a few months ago about the physiological sigh and comparing it to other breathing techniques and other types of meditation. And it came out on top compared to, I think, 5 different breathing techniques. And they showed that if you did it for 5 minutes a day, that it significantly changed the level of cortisol in your body. And also, because of that it regulated stress really, really well. You can find the physiological sigh on YouTube as well. If you type it in, there's a scientist, Dr. Huberman, and he has a 5-minute video, a follow along video for the physiological sigh if you wanted to try that. For some of you, it might make you a bit dizzy, so just practice it safely. Another way to change the breath is called horse breath. So this is, you flutter your lips like a horse when they sigh. So you inhale and then exhale and just let the lips flutter. You might notice that you do any one of these things when you're feeling stressed already. And that's just because our bodies are intuitive and they know how to regulate themselves. So they're already kind of doing it, which is great. You can use your vision. So our eyes are an extension of our brain. Closing our eyes is a way to cue the brain that we're safe, because it's basically saying there's no threats in our environment. You can rub around your eyes, so you can kind of give yourself a little massage around the eyes, opening up your periphery. So making sure that you're able to see all the things in your peripheral vision is a cue to the nervous system that you're safe. Looking far to the left or far to the right. So if you keep your head forward, but hold your eye all the way to the left and just hold it there until you notice some kind of release. So your shoulders might melt down. You might have a sigh. You might have a deep swallow, something like that. And then look the other way. This is, again, just a cue to the nervous system that you're safe. And we're going to get into a lot more about why in 2 weeks from now. Using touch. So you can put your hand on your chest and just put a little bit of pressure there, or you can give yourself a hug. You can do a little bit of self-massage, and there's a spot in your ear. So right above the hole, there's a little kind of like finger-sized spot. If you touch right there, that is where your ventral vagus nerve comes closest to the skin in the body. So by putting pressure in that spot, you're kind of cueing the nervous system to calm down as well. So this is just a very brief kind of foray into nervous system regulation and some tools that you can start using today. Movement and vocalizations are really great for regulating the nervous system. So things like dancing, singing, Tai Chi. Obviously, dancing is going to be difficult for a lot of people with any sort of chronic condition. But it is, you can grade any activity to make it a little bit easier. So you don't have to, full on be in the middle of a dance floor, but maybe at home you could throw on one very slow song and kind of move your body to that song in an intuitive way. And that can be kind of how you express that. Or singing along with your favorite song. Tai Chi is really slow movement, which can be really helpful. Yoga is helpful for some people. Some people find, with being dizzy and stuff like that, it's a little bit harder. So I often suggest Feldenkrais for my clients because it's kind of like yoga, but it's so slow. It's like if you took yoga and slowed it down like 200%. So it's much more accessible. You can look up Feldenkrais on YouTube. There's a bunch of videos. If you have a certain part of your body that's in pain, let's say your neck hurts, you could look up like Feldenkrais for neck, and there's probably going to be a video for it. Also mindful walking, including lots of pacing. Hopefully your care practitioners have talked to you about pacing because that's really important with anything chronic. So it's also important, talking about pacing, to think about when you're going to use these activities. So if you're feeling, what I like to do is kind of rate how you're feeling out of 10. So if you're in the green zone, like I say, which is like about a 1 to a 4 out of 10 for your symptomology, so for your pain or for your emotions, then you can do things that are a little harder, right? Like if you want to regulate, so you can connect with loved ones, you can engage in pleasant activities, you can build mastery. So maybe you practice the guitar or the piano, or you move your body, you write down gratitudes, you do things that are a little bit harder. If you're feeling, the intensity of that sensation around a 4 to a 7, that's the yellow zone, then you can use these regulation techniques that we're talking about, these somatic techniques. You can maybe do some thought challenges. Perhaps you've talked with another practitioner about how to do that. And meditation is a good thing to do in the yellow zone. Now, if you're at a 7 out of 10 or higher, it's probably a really good idea to use distraction. I don't always think distraction is a good idea, but positive distractions are really, really useful when we're really overwhelmed. We don't want to try to engage in a bunch of like therapeutic activities when we're really overwhelmed, because it's not going to get anywhere. And also mindfulness is going to be really hard when we are, more than 7 out of 10. So distractions and pleasant sensations, so like we talked about the sensory modulation stuff, can be really helpful. And then if you're feeling very, very overwhelmed, then like you're feeling suicidal, then hopefully you have a safety plan with one of your practitioners, or you can always call a helpline. So some other treatment possibilities that can help to really connect you with your body and start to soothe the nervous system. Massage is a great one. Acupuncture and neurofeedback is another one that really works from the bottom up. So neurofeedback is basically this device that you put on your head, and it reads your brain waves and it feeds back to you in real time whether your brain is regulated or not. And then it gives you cues when you start to regulate. So when you start to feel calm, you start to feel focused, then you'll get points in a game on your phone. And it's sort of like giving a dog a cookie every time it does something good. Basically, you're training your brain to do that good thing more, to be in an optimal, calm, focused state more. And neurofeedback has been studied for all kinds of different things, PTSD, chronic pain, ADHD, loads of things. It can help with memory and concentration and pain levels and anxiety levels. So it's really useful to work literally with the brain, right? Like it's literally signals from your brain. The clinic that I work at offers neurofeedback, and it's offered virtually. So we deliver the device to you, and then you can use the device in your own home. So the website for that is just here in a little bit. So I'm going to open up to questions, and then I'll just put my resources page up while I answer questions. So this is the website, smpc.tech, for neurofeedback, if you're interested in that. If you're interested in therapy with me as a practitioner, you can go to my website or you can email me. And if you don't have money for therapy right now, you can go on my Instagram or my TikTok. I post videos every single day about things like this, how to regulate your nervous system and how to manage trauma and manage ADHD and manage pain, things like that. So there's a lot of information on here that might be useful if you don't have the money for therapy right now. So yeah, I'm going to go to the questions. Okay. So polyvagal, someone asked what day again is the polyvagal? It is August 2nd. And I did talk about the top down versus bottom up. So hopefully that question is answered. I'm not sure if Dr. Arsenault is going to give out the slides, but I can certainly send them to him. I don't know if he has an email list or how it works. So yeah, I am taking new patients. I live in Nelson, BC, so I do everything virtually. I don't really know too many people in person myself, but there is a group of therapists. I think they have like 300 therapists called No Fear. You can call them and ask for someone in person if you don't want to do virtual. But like I said, I do offer virtual. Okay, so people may think that trauma means accidents or war or PTSD. They may be unfamiliar with developmental trauma. I'm not really sure what you're referring to with developmental trauma. Maybe you mean like childhood trauma. But yeah, that's definitely a part of trauma. Trauma is a very loose definition, which I maybe could have included in there. But trauma is basically anything that overwhelms the nervous system's ability to cope. So it can be a lot of things for a lot of people, and something that's traumatic for one person might not be traumatic for someone else. So for example, two people can see the exact same thing in war, and one person can come back with severe PTSD, and the other person can come back like relatively unscathed. It just depends on your nervous system and sort of like how your nervous system developed over time and the other things that have happened in your life. So yeah, trauma is very complex, and there can be a lot of different parts to trauma. I'm sorry, I didn't see the thing about not being able to see me. Yeah, it's a very hot and sunny day, and the sun was coming through the window where I normally sit. So it was a little hard to get proper lighting in here. I'm sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, so someone's asking about how to release reactivity and tension and feeling triggered by bodily sensations and a lot of reactivity in the body. So using all the techniques that I recommended in this will be really good for connecting with the body and for releasing things from the body. And then especially the nervous system regulation techniques. And then, like I said, we'll kind of review some of the nervous system regulation techniques we talked about today and go into more in 2 weeks. So that'll be a good one for releasing. Okay. I'm just kind of reading through the questions here, so bear with me. Okay, so this person basically, to sum up their question, they're asking if they have to focus on something for a long period of time, then stimulation brings them back into focus. So often what happens is that our brains can get into either hypoarousal, so we feel not aroused enough to pay attention, or we feel hyper aroused, so we're too stimulated. And you've probably all felt this. So, if you're watching a lecture that's really boring or something, then you just, and there's nothing else to do, then you start to, kind of fall asleep or feel bored, or just like it's very hard to pay attention. Or, if you're reading a book and it's not the most entertaining, same thing, you might feel really bored. But if you're able to arouse your nervous system a little bit, so give it a bit of stimulation by tapping your fingers, or drinking fizzy water, or chewing some gum, or if you're reading a book, maybe you throw on some music, that can stimulate your brain to a state of arousal, so a state of wakefulness where you're actually able to pay attention. So that's why that's basically sensory stimulation, which is kind of what we were talking about, is like bringing the arousal up or bringing it down. If you have physical symptoms of stress, but you don't have thoughts of stress, should you do those activities to improve your, yes. So these activities are very good for physical symptoms of stress, and if those physical symptoms manifest into thoughts. But basically what we're doing is working with the body, right? We're trying to help the body and support the body. And all of these things that we went over today will be really beneficial for supporting the body in that way. Okay, so this person's saying that they wake up and before they have a chance to think about anything, they have extreme anxiety, and they watch something on TV to switch their mind away from the anxiety. And they think that might not be the best strategy. So like we talked about, depending on how intense the anxiety is, if it's like more than 7 out of 10, then a distraction technique is probably a good idea. TV is an okay distraction technique, but it's also kind of a numbing technique. So when we're talking distraction, we also want to think about like other things that can distract us. So maybe a really strong scent, or working on an art project, or making a Pinterest board of a lot of very pretty pictures, or doing something that's a little bit more engaging than just watching TV, where it's a little bit more active than passive, or creating different sensations in your body, like holding an ice cube or something like that. So any of those things can be helpful. And then again, for that anxiety, the techniques that we listed today and techniques that will go on in all of the future sessions will be really helpful as well. Sometimes people have a really hard time with meditating and breathing techniques. You just got to find the one that works for you, because sitting down to meditate is very difficult. And there's a million different kinds of meditations that could work. So it's really just playing around with it and finding what works for you, and then finding which nervous system technique works for you. Some of my clients love the physiological side. Some of my clients prefer to use the eye techniques, right? So it just depends on the client and what they prefer, but you don't have to do breathing or meditation if you don't want to. There's a lot of other ways to regulate your nervous system and to do somatic therapy. How would this relate to phobias? Like a fear of enclosed spaces is the example. So with phobias, basically the best research points to, if you want to get over it, because sometimes you don't have to get over it. Like sometimes it does, like you can just have a phobia and that's okay. But sometimes you have a phobia and it really gets in the way of your life, and you want to be able to get over it. So if you do want to get over your phobia, the best research shows that it's really good to do exposure therapy with a trained therapist. And what that entails is, so for example, if you were scared of spiders, you'd set up like a hierarchy of the fear. So the least fearful thing might be like looking at a picture of a spider, and the most fearful thing might be like holding one in your hand. And you would go through that list And as you go through the list, so let's say you're looking at the picture of the spider, then you would regulate your nervous system. So you would notice all the sensations that come up. Your heart rate starts to go, there's a constriction in your chest, et cetera, et cetera. And then you do things to bring that level of arousal back down. And then you're able to regulate yourself with that picture of the spider. And then you can move to the next step. So phobias are pretty an intense process, but it is possible to get over phobias. When I ask my body what it needs, nothing ever comes up. Any tips? So yes, it's really, really hard to start to get into feeling intuitive about our body and knowing what our body needs. The best way that I would start to do this is to think about, if you had a child or an animal or a best friend that was in the exact same position that you were in, what would you offer them? Like if you, a very basic example, you stub your toe and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know. And you think about, okay, if my friend stubbed their toe, I might offer them ice, or I might be like, hey, are you okay? Or how bad is it? Or can we take a look at it? Or, you know what I mean? There's like a lot of different ways we might treat someone else. And sometimes it's a lot easier to think about having compassion for someone else than it is for us. It just comes a bit easier. Okay, someone was sharing a somatic counseling person who they say is amazing. That's great. How do we do that if noticing pain less can cause me to be less careful about it? So we're not noticing it less, we're just noticing other things as well. So it's like, instead of having our, our eyes sort of like zoned in on the pain, we're opening up our visual system and we're able to see everything else that's also happening at the exact same time. Because in any given moment, there are hundreds of sensations happening, and being able to pay attention to more of them can again create that the plasticity of attention, the neuroplasticity of attention. Also, I think it's important to note that oftentimes when we're in chronic pain, it's not because something is like broken or like a muscle is pulled or something like that, because muscles and bones and ligaments will typically heal within 3-4 months. So there's often a lot more movement that we can do with a joint when we're in chronic pain than our body is like allowing us to do. So it's really important to talk with a physiotherapist or kinesiologist about what's safe, and then exploring those movements that are actually safe, because often we do way less movement than we actually physically can with our body, because our body is basically saying like, nope, don't do anything, it's dangerous, and it might be more safe than we think. And that's not to discount pain or say that there's nothing actually physically wrong, because often, there could be pinched nerves and there can be slipped discs and all this stuff, but oftentimes there's just more safe movement than we actually give ourselves credit for. How should we conclude the pendulation exercise after switching a few times? I think just kind of naturally going back to whatever it was that you were doing. You can kind of shift. For me, with my pain, I had to do it very frequently in the beginning, to be honest. So it was like almost an all-day endeavor. It's like every time I noticed my pain, I would notice how nice the wind felt, or there's a bird singing over there, or whatever. Yeah. Tarabrach is spelled Tarabrach. I don't know if I can type in the chat. I'm not sure. But yeah, that's who she is. I've been doing Feldenkrais all year and I find it quite fast. That's really interesting. I wonder maybe if you're doing it with a practitioner that's a little quicker, and maybe it's useful to look into other practitioners. So they're asking about the spot for placing your finger for pressing on the vagus nerve. So if you were to put your finger in your ear, like where you would put a Q-tip, it's literally just the spot right above it. There's like a divot, and anywhere in that divot is quite innervated by the vagus nerve. So putting pressure there is what I was talking about. Okay. So neurofeedback, someone asked if there's an app that I recommend for neurofeedback. Neurofeedback has to be guided by a practitioner, and there's a specific device that you put on your head. So there isn't an app for it because you would need more than what your phone is capable of doing. And also it's typically guided by a practitioner. There is a device called Muse, which you can buy. I think it's like $300. And you can do neurofeedback with the Muse device. However, it only does meditation. So you wouldn't be able to use it for like concentration or focus or memory or PTSD or anything like that. It's strictly to enhance meditation. You mentioned that yoga is usually too much for patients. What about yin yoga? Yeah, yin yoga is great. If I am recommending yoga, I usually recommend yin or restorative for a lot of my clients. It's just that even with yin, like for example, if you're in child's pose, your head is down and then it's coming up. And I have a lot of concussion clients and that makes them very dizzy. And the same thing if you have POTS or some people with long COVID, head down, head up makes you dizzy, which is why I recommend Feldenkrais over yoga, because there isn't as many of those movements depending on what kind of video you're doing. But if it works for you, that's great. Yoga is definitely well-researched. There's a lot of studies about how yoga helps with anxiety and a lot of chronic conditions. I'm just gonna take a sip of my water. I don't have any resources in the Okanagan. I'm sorry. I live in Nelson. I'm not super connected. Most of my connections are kind of global just because of the nature of TikTok and Instagram. So this person says, feeling into certain parts of my body can make them twitch aggressively. I never know how to interpret them or work with them. So comments about working with the twitches. So if focusing on your body creates a twitch, if we're thinking of it from a somatic perspective, if you've already ruled out anything else that could be happening, so for example, you've been tested by doctors and made sure there isn't something else going on, the twitching could be part of your body trying to get your attention. And you might, like, one of the things you might try and do is either, clench and release the muscle where it's twitching, and see if you can kind of work with it, or maybe move with the twitch, right? So if it starts to twitch, like see if you can complete the movement and kind of move the energy through your body, or shake that area, or slowly massage that area, or just kind of like introduce different sensations to that area that's twitching. I am unable to see the time because oh wait, actually, yes, hold on. Great. Okay. So we still have a bit of time. Someone asked if I studied under Dr. Adele Diamond for my undergrad. I did not. I don't know who that is, but it sounds interesting. Some people are saying, thank you. You're so welcome. I love talking about this stuff. Someone else asked about the spot on the ear. So, yeah, hopefully that's clear now that I reiterated it. Would you still recommend connecting with the body exercises if your trauma comes from assault? Yes, definitely. Because after an assault, we have become disconnected from our body. We have less autonomy over our body after something like that. So it's really good to bring back your personal power, bring back your personal connection to your body, and not allowing your connection to your body to be colored by what that person did. So yeah, I think it's really good to connect with your body. It's going to be hard. And I think it's really important to do it with the guidance of a therapist, or with the guidance of a loving friend or family member or something who can be there to support you. But yeah, it's important. So this person's an RCC and they've done somatic experience training. Just wondering what other somatic training you've done. So yeah, most of what I've done is in polyvagal theory and a lot of things around nervous system regulation. I've also done things like acceptance and commitment therapy, cognitive behavior therapy. Those aren't somatic though. Most of my knowledge is just coming from looking into different studies and sort of reading a lot of books and being a voracious person about all of the information that I can possibly get my hands on. So it's kind of just a hodgepodge of all the books I've read and all the studies I've read, and the podcasts that I listen to from, people like Dr. Huberman and stuff like that. So is neurofeedback covered by extended benefits? That's a great question. Some extended benefits have covered neurofeedback. So we have had some success with certain companies, and it just really honestly sometimes depends on the place that you have extended benefits through. And if you're on long-term disability or something like that, sometimes they'll fund it as well if they think it means that you might be able to get back to doing some work. So I'm an occupational therapist. We also have kinesiologists, counselors, and physiotherapists that offer neurofeedback on our team. So depending on your coverage, you can work with one of those people. The rental fee is often not covered, but it, like I said, it depends on the person, on the company. And the fees per session where you're doing neurofeedback guided by the clinician are usually paid for. So yeah. Is neuroplasticity only provided by OT? So neuroplasticity is often confused as like a specific kind of therapy, but it's not. Neuroplasticity is literally just like the ability of the brain to change. And so a lot of different exercises that people do are neuroplastic exercises, but it doesn't necessarily have to be done by OT. So for example, like if your physiotherapist has someone with a stroke and they're retraining them how to use their leg, that's using neuroplasticity because it's basically like retraining the brain how to do something by repeating it over and over. And so like a counselor could do that by helping you change your thoughts. An OT can do that by helping you change your behaviors and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of different ways. Basically, neuroplasticity is just changing the brain through repetition. So pretty much anyone can do it, any rehab person. So a person said they often feel in their body too much. Do you think it's possible to be too much in the body when dealing with chronic symptoms? So I think if you're very mindful and you're aware of all of your symptoms at once, there's no such thing as kind of like too much. It is possible to be very wired towards the unpleasant symptoms and then to really, really be paying attention to them. But if you're paying attention to positive symptoms, it's not a bad thing to be mindful. I don't think there's such a thing as being too mindful. So someone was saying that they have an upcoming MRI and they're nervous because of claustrophobia, and they were asking if these techniques would help. Yeah, I would take a look at the nervous system regulation slide and choose a few of those that you can do while you're in the MRI. Like even the physiological sigh should be really helpful, or the horse breath or something like that. Can this help with grieving? I've lost too many family members. I'm really sorry to hear that has been your experience. Yeah, oftentimes grief can show up in the body in all kinds of ways. And grief is like this weird beast that just can rear its ugly head in the strangest of ways and can cause a lot of things. And I always try to tell my clients, like, everything is normal with grief. Like in the first month after grieving someone, if you're hallucinating or, they're talking to you or whatever, like all of it's normal. And so we can have these very intense bodily sensations that show up. And so working with the body can be really helpful for grieving for sure. Okay. A couple people are asking me to show again the part of the ear where the vagus nerve comes close to the surface. Let me see if I can see myself. I don't know how. Yeah, again, it's just, I forget what it's called. I used to know the anatomical terms, so you could Google it, but yeah, just your ear hole, and then literally right above it, there's a little divot. So literally just a little divot right above the ear hole. Yeah. I am working at the surgery clinic, yes, but I also have my own company, Uplift Virtual Therapy. So I work for both. I just work virtually. What are my thoughts on tapping? So I think you're probably referring to the emotional freedom technique, also called tapping. I think it's great. I also practice that with my clients, and it helps a lot of people. You can look up the emotional freedom technique or tapping on YouTube if you want to learn more. Is trauma different than feeling burnout with long COVID? So trauma, it depends. So some people with long COVID have a lot of trauma. Some people have trauma from COVID, right? Either you lost somebody with COVID, or it was just a really scary time. It was like a very big collective trauma. And oftentimes these long-standing conditions look very similar in the brain, like we were kind of talking about in the beginning, where there's not a lot of frontal cortex activation. There's a lot of amygdala activation. So they just kind of look similar in the brain. But yeah, depending on the person, some people with long COVID may have trauma and some people might not. Trauma is usually something that happens to us, that's life-threatening, that causes our nervous system to be dysregulated. What are red flags for when to see a doctor versus self-regulation practices with new sensations? That's a great question. So what I usually tell my clients is that red flags are anything very sudden or unexpected. So if there's a sudden redness or swelling, or a sudden loss of bladder control, or an unexplained weight loss, or unexplained marks or something that are new and unexplained, definitely talk to a doctor. And it can be really, really hard, honestly, sometimes to tell the difference between a panic attack and something being actually physically wrong. A lot of people end up in the ER with a panic attack if they aren't familiar with what it feels like. So sometimes it's hard to tell the difference, but just keep that in mind. If it's like very sudden or very unexplained, then you might want to chat with a doctor about it. Or you've noticed over the last month you've lost a bunch of weight or something like that, then definitely talk to a doctor. Do I think tracking symptoms is helpful or harmful? So I like to have my clients track symptoms sometimes, like migraines, for example, or sleep quality or pain sometimes, but not for too long. I think any longer than 6 months isn't giving us that much information anymore. But what I also like to do is, if we're tracking symptoms, that we're also tracking positive things. So again, it's part of that neuroplasticity of attention. So if you're tracking your symptoms, also have a list of today, the top 3 things that I felt that were the best were. So for example, I really enjoyed a hot chocolate that I had this morning. My body felt really nice when I laid in bed, and I had a good cuddle with my cat. So you would list at least 3 things that were positive sensations as well, so that you're not just focusing on tracking just the symptoms. Are sessions covered by MSP? So no, MSP doesn't cover any rehabilitation or counseling, unfortunately. I wish we did. I really do. Yeah, Peter Levine is someone said Peter Levine is amazing with somatic work. Yeah, Peter Levine is the father of somatic experiencing. He's the one who created it. Well, somatic experiencing is a very specific kind of somatic therapy. Somatic therapy has been around for centuries, but he created somatic experiencing. So yeah, he's great. I definitely recommend checking out his work. He also has some really good books, Peter Levine. Highly activated startle reflex. What do I recommend for that? So this same stuff, starting to soothe your nervous system, starting to get in touch with your body, get in touch with your symptoms, that kind of stuff, all the stuff that we talked about today, all the stuff we're going to talk about in 2 weeks, that's going to help with startle reflex for sure. So someone asked me what my thoughts are on TRE. I don't know what that stands for, unfortunately. It might stand for something that I know, but I'm not sure. I'm sorry. Yeah. So someone said, would you say that sometimes when bringing initial attention to an unpleasant sensation, it can initially feel intense or worse, but then it lessens over time? 100%. Yeah. Especially if we're not used to paying attention to our negative sensations, it's going to be angry when we first pay attention to it. It's going to be upset. So yes, focusing on it for sure will make it more intense, but that sensation can't hurt you any more than it already is, right? So you just have to know that just because it got more intense in that moment doesn't mean it's going to stay at that level of intensity. And oftentimes it'll start to like calm back down when we focus on it for a little while. If you have low cortisol, should you still do activities to calm down your nervous system? Yeah, so calming down the nervous system isn't all related to cortisol because, so this will be explained a lot more in 2 weeks. But there's the freeze response, there's like different survival responses, right? So we have fight, flight, fawn, and freeze. Freeze is going to be really low cortisol. So if you're like in depression and shame and shut down and that kind of stuff, depending on the kind of depression you have, if you have depression and anxiety, you might have high cortisol, but some people have lower cortisol and that makes them very fatigued. Or their cortisol just isn't cycling as it should. And again, nervous system regulation is going to be really important for cortisol as well. Yeah. Whether it's high or low, it's sort of like we're balancing the system rather than changing it fully. Maybe avoid the physiological sigh because that one specifically changes cortisol levels. Do you work with people with high ACEs as well as chronic illnesses? Yes, definitely. I can tell you that the majority of my clients who have chronic illnesses also have high ACEs. They kind of go hand in hand for whatever reason. But yeah, ACEs are adverse childhood events. Yeah, for sure. It's very common. Although there's a lot of questions about whether people are automatically registered or when the next registration is going to come through. And I'm sure Dr. Arsenault can talk about that at the end of the session. So we have about 5 minutes left. I'm going to get through as many questions as I can. And then if you have more questions, you can email me. If you learn to downregulate your nervous system during an emotional experience, would it stand to reason that you'd be spending less energy and could increase your energy envelope over time? Yes, that's a great way of looking at it. When we're not expending so much energy on our emotional regulation and on our it's a lot of energy, for example, to feel very dysregulated after a fight or something like that. And if we don't expend that energy, then we have a lot more energy for other meaningful activities. So that's a great way of looking at it. Would you be willing to say more about how you reduced chronic pain with these techniques? Yes, definitely. I have an entire hour dedicated to that. I don't remember the exact date, but it's on Dr. Arsenault's website. So you can just look for the chronic pain one that I'm doing. I think it's in a few weeks, maybe. In terms of therapists in Vancouver, again, I'm not super connected with other therapists, except for the people at my clinic. I've been working there since I graduated, so I don't have a big referral network, but I do know that No Fear, it has like 300 therapists, and if you give them a call, they can connect you with somebody who can see you in person. So words of wisdom for those with ADHD and chronic fatigue, where ADHD benefits from stimulation a lot of the time, while CFS ME requires down regulation. Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm just reading the rest of it. Yeah, I think it's really about paying attention to what your body needs at the moment and what your body needs for the task that you're doing. So if you need to focus and you need to bring up that regulation, then that's fine to do for a while. And I think if you're doing it in these gentle ways, it's not going to impact the CFS as much. So for example, if I'm like smelling a lemon to help me focus, that's not going to take too much out of my energy envelope, right? So finding things that are, give you a little bit of a natural boost, but not so much that it's going to drain your energy. It's a tricky balance, honestly, to have both. But it's just a matter of like finding that balance over time, which is totally possible. Okay. My dreams are stressful and scary. I don't watch TV or anything that would trigger that. What do bad dreams mean in that regard? So when we're having bad dreams, it can be a sign that our nervous system is, dysregulated. We're in that fight or flight, and it's kind of expressing itself at night. You can Google, there's something called the nightmare protocol. It's a dialectical behavior therapy technique, and it's really helpful for nightmares. So that's something you can do. And also just trying to do a lot of these regulation techniques right before bed, or like some meditation or some yoga right before bed to kind of really calm yourself down right before bed. And then also sometimes different things going on hormonally or with our blood can cause nightmares. Melatonin also can cause nightmares for a lot of people. So if you're taking that before bed, you might want to switch to a different kind of like natural sedative. But yeah, nightmares can be a lot of different things. And there can be like, if you have thyroid problems or you have like diabetes, there's like a lot of different things that can cause nightmares. So yeah, but it could be one of those things. I would definitely recommend doing some exercises before bed to soothe yourself. The somatic counselor name with am I the only one seeing these? Oh, okay. People are asking me to share the counselor that was shared earlier. They shared a website. I just don't see a chat function. It looks like her Instagram is the interrupting therapist. So you can probably find them there. I'm not sure what their name is. Lisa Voth, Voth, it looks like. Sorry, they just shared a website, so I'm not 100% sure. Okay, where was I? I'll just answer one more. Are there any somatic practices to address post-exertional malaise? So yeah, I mean, post-exertional malaise is part of CFS, so it's something that's going to happen. But like we were just talking about with the energy envelope, if you're managing how much your limbic system and your amygdala are kind of going into that overactivation, then you're probably going to have less post-exertional malaise because you're going to, that energy envelope is more managed. So using these techniques that we reviewed now and that we're going to review in future sessions, that could be beneficial.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. I think we're on the same page for a lot of things. We have a very similar way of thinking. I think it's great that you're willing to work with my patients. The slides, if you're willing, will be mailed out tomorrow. And the invitation to the 2-week one, we usually just do it 2 weeks ahead. And so the invitation has already gone out for the 1 and 2 weeks.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks so much for the opportunity to present. I had fun.
Pleasure. Next week, you guys will have to put up with me. It's POTS. So we're going to do the POTS session, and then we'll come back in 2 weeks with Zara.
Perfect.
Sorry, Bruno's asking me something. Oh yeah, and for those of you who wanted to participate in a group medical visit on mast cell activation syndrome, we're doing a question and answer session. Just let Bruno know.
Have a great evening, everybody.